David, are we on already? We're on already. Oh, okay. So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Thank you, and thank you to our guests for coming. Shabbat Shalom to everybody out there in YouTube land. It's nice to have you. Before we start, just a few announcements. Number one, this is like number 1 through 10 announcement, is remember about the Purim dinner and comedy show. It's going to be fantastic. Saturday night, March 11th, 6 p.m. You can buy your tickets online. Just go to our website, chj-detroit.org, or you can buy them here. You can call the office as well. So that's going to be a very, very, very fun night, and I think we're going to have a really big crowd here for that. Next week, we're going to hear from a member and a retort to our member. Let me put it that way. We're going to hear from Renee Lichtman, who has an interesting take that I'll tell you right now that I don't agree with on Ukraine and the war. And then we're going to hear from Professor Fred Pearson from Wayne State University to provide a kind of counterpoint. There are other points and counterpoints as well, too. But we're going to let them at least present those two. So I hope you'll come and you'll hear what a lot of us in the Social Justice Committee have been hearing from Renee. It's an interesting point of view, and I think Professor Pearson has what to say. Sorry? Monday. So Monday night, we're actually going to have the same setup here because we are going to be hosting a panel discussion called Wither Israel. Wither, W-H-I-T-H-E-R, not W-I-T-H-E-R, although with what's going on right now, as you all heard a few weeks ago, I'm not so sure. I'll give you an example. The shekel was one of the strongest currencies in the world until 4 weeks ago, and now it's blowing up. You can go to Israel for free. The dollar is worth that much against the shekel right now. But we're going to hear from, I want you to hear the lineup. The lineup is, well, I'll be on the panel. It will include Professor Howard Lupovich from Wayne State University. Natan has been asked to be on the panel. He is certainly our resident expert on Israeli history. And we'll also be joined by Asher Lopatin, Rabbi Asher Lopatin, who is the director of the Jewish Community Relations Council / American Jewish Committee here in town. Rabbi Lopatin I also happen to admire for other reasons. He is an Orthodox rabbi who is the head of a yeshiva in New York, but he's also an extremely pluralistic man, as you can tell from what he does here for a living. So, but I'm sure he will be bringing us. This is a kind of a centrist panel. We're not looking at the extremes. We're looking at people that are sort of in the center on this issue, and we're not going to allow any grandstanding. We're going to have written questions only, because we've got friends who like to come and make speeches. So we're gonna have a very civilized and hopefully very lively talk about some of the concerns that I think the American Jewish community and all of us have about what's going on in Israel right now. And that will include the Palestinian issue. We'll also include the judiciary and the reforms that are being made there. Anyway, next week I told you about, and then we take a break the following week because we're going to be here on Saturday night instead, celebrating Purim. So anyway, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for watching us at home. And I'm going to begin with the first slide. Melanie, if you will. Melanie's taking over the slides tonight from Arthur, who is in Florida. As these Shabbat candles that we are about to kindle give light to all who behold them, so may we by our lives give light to all who behold us. As their brightness reminds us of the generations who brought light, so may we, in our own day, be among those who bring light. I'd like to invite Diana and Jerry Lieberman to light our Shabbat candles.
Baruch
Our readers tonight are Lonnie Fleischer, Jean Klarich, Susie Friedman, Rabbi Miriam Jairus, Audrey Pleasant, and we'll begin with Charlie Paul.
Let us endeavor to find still moments, quiet places within to refresh ourselves, moments without ceaseless questions or inner debates when we meditate only on goodness. Let us endeavor to nurture courage, recalling moments of strength. Let us remember days of fortitude and the power that we found. Let us endeavor to turn to light, to feel the warmth of a loving touch, our faces and fingers outstretched alive to each other.
Shabbat Shalom, my loves. There are times when we seek things for ourselves and measure failure by what we do not gain. When we gather on Shabbat, we seek not to acquire, but to share. There are times when we exploit nature as if it were a horn of plenty that can never be exhausted. But when we gather on Shabbat, we consider our true place on this planet. There are times when we act as if we cared nothing for the rights of others, but when we gather on Shabbat, we remind ourselves that justice is our duty and a better world our goal. Let us embrace this moment, a Shabbat gathering to unite, to learn, to better ourselves.
Shalom Aleichem, Ohavei HaShalom, Shomrei Shalom. Shalom Aleichem, Rodefei HaShalom, Shalom Aleichem. Boachem LeShalom, Ohavei HaShalom, Tzedchem Shalom, miyom zel hayamim habayim, Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, Ohavei HaShalom, Shomrei Shalom. Shalom Aleichem, Rodefei HaShalom, Shalom Aleichem. Boachem LeShalom, Ohavei HaShalom, Tzedchem LeShalom. Miyom zel hayamim habayim,
May all who walk the paths of righteousness, who work for the good of humanity and bear the burdens of others, and who give bread to the hungry, who clothe the naked and take the friendless into their homes, see the work of their hands endure, and may the seed they sow bring abundant harvest.
Where is my light? My light is in me. Where is my hope? My hope is in me. Where is my strength? My strength is in me and in you, and in you. Where is my strength? My strength is in me and in you, and in you.
Let us strive to lead loving lives, compassionate lives, with our hearts, with our wisdom, and with our actions. These words we inscribe in our innermost being, aspiring to practice them day and night, teaching them diligently to our children, through our words and especially through our deeds, so that the next generations may learn to revere and celebrate life.
A few minutes ago, I heard somebody say after they read this for number 7 that it was their favorite one. So I'm going to read it again.
Is this the same one?
It is.
Michelle!
No. She knows. We dealt with it. I'm really going to read it again.
Let's do it like a rap.
Oh, Rabbi. May all who walk the paths of righteousness, who work for the good of humanity and bear the burdens of others, and who give bread to the hungry, who clothe the naked and take the friendless into their homes, see the work of their hands endure, and may the seed they sow bring abundant harvests.
That was a big, amen. A big cut and paste error.
We forgive you, Rabbi.
I just want these messages to get through.
Amar Klal gadol gadol batorah, Amar Rabbi Akiva.
Yeah, we started that a few weeks ago.
At my request.
He's a big Rabbi Akiva fan.
I just like it.
Can't get enough of him.
Isaiah prophesied, "They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." The poet Yehuda Amichai wrote, "Don't stop after beating the swords into plowshares. Don't stop. Go on beating and make musical instruments out of them. Whoever wants to make war again will have to turn them into plowshares first."
Na'aseh shalom shalom ba'olam, Na'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam, ve'imru shalom. Na'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam, ve'imru shalom. Na'aseh shalom shalom ba'olam, Na'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam, ve'imru shalom.
In this community where we find strength and common purpose, we turn our minds and hearts toward all those who need our love and support, those who are ill, those who suffer pain of the body or spirit, those who are lonely, those who have been wronged. Tonight, our well wishes are extended to these members of our community and their loved ones, to Roy Chestnut, Ruthie Goldman, and Rabbi Peter Schweitzer. And if there's someone whom you're thinking about whose name you'd like to share, please do. Start over here. Anybody? Everybody's healthy? Good. May all who suffer know that they are not alone, that we are there. May they be healed quickly. May they experience a refuah shlema, a complete recovery, the renewal of their bodies and the renewal of their spirits.
Mekom hakoach betocheinu, Mekorot habracha mikevroteinu. May the source of strength that dwells so deep within us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Shalom. Mekom hakoach betocheinu, Mekorot habracha mikevroteinu. May those in need of healing know refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Shalom. You can shed tears that they are gone, or you can smile because they've lived. You can close your eyes and pray that they will come back, or you can open your eyes and see all that they have left. Your heart can be empty because you can't see them, or you could be full of the love that you shared. You can turn your back on tomorrow
and live yesterday, or you can be happy for tomorrow because of yesterday. You can remember them and only that they are gone, or you can cherish their memory and let it live on. You can cry and close your mind, be empty and turn your back, or you can do what they would want, smile, open your eyes, love, and go on. Our thoughts turn to those who are no longer with us, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every people and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We recall now our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. Tonight, our congregation mourns the death last week of Sybil Offen, Yizichra Livracha. Sybil's memorial will take place on Thursday here in this room at 11 a.m. We observe tonight, too, the yahrzeits of Herman Becker, Michael Berman, Annette Borovitz, Samuel Foreman, Max Luria, and Herman Schneider. If there's someone whom you're thinking about, whom you've lost, once again, feel free to share their name. Anybody on this side? Yeah. Thank you. Tom?
Joe Gayden.
Anyone else? Lonnie?
All three of my brothers died at this time of the year, Mark, Bruce, and Paul.
Did we miss anyone? Yizichram Livracha. May the memories of these people provide us with a sense of blessing and comfort as we go through our lives in their absence. If you can do so comfortably, please rise as we recite together our humanistic interpretation of Kaddish. Nit gadal v'nit kadash beruach ha'adam. Let us dignify and ennoble all people in the spirit of our shared humanity. Let us acclaim the preciousness of life. Let us show gratitude for life by approaching it with reverence. Let us embrace the whole world, even as we wrestle with its parts. Let us each, in our own way, take up our share in serving the world and seeking truth. May our commitment to life help us to strengthen healing of spirit and peace of mind. May justice and peace permeate and comfort the house of Israel and all those who dwell on earth. And let us say, Ken Yehi, may it be so. Please be seated. I was remiss in not announcing, although you'll have plenty of time to hear about it because it's not till May, this wonderful concert that Joseph is putting together. We'll have some of our first details about it in this week's newsletter.
Check the newsletter.
It'll be a whole potpourri of things, a lot of classical, some musical education and Jewish education from what we've talked about. And it's going to be fabulous, and I know you have two world-class musicians that are joining you.
Yeah.
So we're looking forward. That is May 7th. What time is it at?
3 p.m.
3 p.m., which is a great time to do this. And, we don't have Vivace anymore, but we still have great music in the world. So that is a Sunday.
Sunday.
That's a Sunday. Anyway, you'll hear more about it in the weeks and months to come. So our program tonight was the idea of Kathy Radner, who, when I told her the date that I'd gotten everybody together for this, and I hope she's watching, said, well, I'll be in Key West. I think a lot of people are in Key West tonight. As you know, Arthur's in Florida. This is the week people go to Florida. Maybe next time I'll put that into consideration. But I know that they're watching us on YouTube tonight. So I hope that we have a nice group that's part of that. I should mention the small coincidence. The movement for Soviet Jewry, about which I'm going to speak in just a moment, it actually got a certain amount of prominence when Kathy's cousin, none other than Gilda Radner, her first cousin, playing her role of Emily Latella, she of the malapropisms, you remember? Emily Latella, What's All This Fuss About? In 1976, she did one called, What's All This Fuss About Soviet Jewelry? And it brought this cause to the attention of the wider American audience. I want to talk a little bit about the international movement for Soviet Jewry. And I want to first start with a quote from a paper I just happened to find online by Rachel Bynus of Barnard College, and it was so beautifully stated I didn't think I could say it any better. The story of why the Soviet Jews emigrated cannot be told by one person. Some might tell you stories about the horrible anti-Semitism they experienced in the Soviet Union. Others might tell you that they were rarely targeted for being Jewish and felt mostly integrated into Soviet society. Not surprisingly, the extent to which Soviet Jews experienced discrimination affected their opinions toward emigrating from the Soviet Union. Some became influenced by the Zionist movement and reconnected with their Jewish tradition, while others wanted to go to the United States in pursuit of the American dream. Even if Soviet Jews had differing experiences while living in the Soviet Union and immigrated at various times towards the end of the 20th century, they shared a common thread. Nationality, rather than religion, was their main association with their shared Jewish ancestry. In any case, though Jews were prominent in the early years of the Russian Revolution, as I'm sure you all are aware, by the time of Stalin and thereafter, there were increasing pressures on Jews to assimilate. I recall learning how even as Yiddish was allowed, and before Stalin promoted, they would change the spellings of Jewish religious words so that they used letters that didn't make them look recognizably Hebrew. Russia and many of the countries that became part of Russia had a long history of anti-Semitism, and once Israel was created, though they were supportive at first, that became as well part of the source of hostility. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, many Jews, particularly those who had Zionist motives and attachments, were detained from emigration. Others began to be detained due to fear of a brain drain that was occurring in the Soviet Union as a result of the many requests to emigrate, particularly from Jews. And still others, there was a feeling that they would embarrass the workers' paradise by departing from that glorious place. These people, many of them who were refused this, were famously represented by Anatoly, now known as Natan Sharansky, and they became known, as you may recall, as refuseniks. This was only a small portion of the Soviet Jews, but they were the ones who fought on that side of the ocean as part of our struggle. In the United States, a number of Jewish organizations became involved early on in the struggle for Soviet Jewish immigration. The Cleveland Council on Soviet Jewry was one of the first in the 1960s. The student struggle for Soviet Jewry, in which I was quite active, mostly as a rabbinical student. We protested cultural events by the Soviet Union. This was during the beginning of détente. We wanted the attention brought to this. The American Jewish community, the World Jewish Congress, finally took note. As we entered the 1970s, excuse me, what ultimately emerged was what was called the National Conference on Soviet Jewry. And it worked side by side with these grassroots efforts. Most of the activism involved public outreach, diplomacy, peaceful protests under the banner of "Let my people go." You might remember that. We had symbolic gestures that became part of our North American consciousness, twinning our bar mitzvahs. I'm certain that was done here. I've asked folks if that was part of what was done here. The bracelets that we wore, the silver bracelets, when we adopted a prisoner of conscience. And the kids and adults throughout my congregation and thousands of congregations in this country, really tens of thousands of American Jews wore those bracelets for many years. The most important achievement of the movement came early on in the 1970s. And of course, because it dovetailed with the Cold War, the arguments were easier in Congress than they might have otherwise been. In 1972, Senator Henry Scoop Jackson, remember him? Yes, the famous senator from Washington State. He introduced the Jackson-Vanik Amendment to the Trade Act of 1974. It's still in effect, and it linked U.S. trade relations with non-market economies, specifically like the Soviet Union, to those countries' restrictions on the freedom of emigration and other human rights. And that became the first real important international sanction against the Soviet Union. My own interest in the movement, while it really gathered steam in college and in rabbinical school, it actually began just after my bar mitzvah in 1975. My family took a trip to Europe and then to Israel. We departed for Israel from Vienna. When we got out to the tarmac, there were tanks surrounding the El Al plane. It was not only because of terrorism, it's because, as we found out on the shuttle over to the plane, there were about a dozen Soviet Jewish families who had recently gotten out, had been detained for quite a while in Vienna, and finally permitted to leave to go to Israel. They were carrying all of their world belongings on their persons, and it was something out of the old films of Ellis Island as they headed there. They were nervous, they were scared. I don't think any of them spoke English, certainly. We tried to talk to them. A few knew a word or two in Hebrew. But they led the applause when the plane landed. It was quite emotional. And when they walked down the stairs, almost to a person, they got on their knees and kissed the ground of Ben Gurion Airport. Over the years, of course, the movement, it being a Jewish movement, had many different opinions and directions that it was taken in. And Israeli and American Jewish groups wound up also bickering here and there. But by and large, it happened. It happened because of leadership from the American government and from the American Jewish community. It culminated in 1987 with the single largest gathering of American Jews in all of our American Jewish history, when we met in Washington. I didn't have the opportunity to go, but they met in Washington, D.C. for a march at the mall. 250,000 American Jews. It was incredible. Ultimately, they also fought about where they were going to settle. The Israelis, of course, wanting very much for them to be directed to Israel, but many of them wanted to come to America, as we're going to hear tonight from the folks who did come here. Ultimately, between 1989, and many came over earlier, and a few came over later, but between 1989 and 2006, this was the very peak, 1.6 million Soviet Jews emigrated. About 61%, 980,000, almost a million, went to Israel and established a community that is extraordinarily powerful and important today. Another 325,000 approximately came here, among them the folks that we're going to meet tonight. And the third largest point of settlement, you may not remember, was Germany, where 220,000 of them settled. Many of them had American family sponsors or other kinds of things that they were able to set up on their own. But by and large, it was the United States Jewish community, through massive fundraising by Jewish federations, that provided the sponsorship. And the United States provided for Israel loan guarantees of billions of dollars that they needed to provide the settlement and resettlement. Nearly every federated community, big and large, big and small, participated. Even at the time I was in Champaign, Illinois as a Hillel director, and we took in 4 or 5 families there in what was a Jewish community of just a few thousand, a couple of thousand. Throughout the period of activism, there was one song that became the anthem for the movement. I'm going to ask Joseph to play it as our panelists come up and take their seats. You may not know it, but for many of us, this was a song that accompanied our struggle for Soviet Jewry. I had the privilege of working in one of the center offices at a Hillel in the University of Cincinnati, where this was one of the center student struggle offices. And when they were finally, when the doors opened, Anatoly Sharansky came back to America, and he first went to New York, and then he went to Cincinnati because of the work of my boss at the time, Rabbi A.B. Ingber, and we sang this song to him. It was a song written by Rabbi Solomon. It was about Anatoly Sharansky and all of the prisoners of conscience and Soviet Jews who just wanted to get out. I'm going to ask now, and I see Alex is here too, so I'm going to ask our panelists to come up as Joseph sings this song, this beautiful song. It's just a 2-minute song, so you guys can get settled. Come on up and get settled while he sings, "We Are Leaving Mother Russia."
They called me Anatole, in prison I did lie. My little window looked upon a Russian sky. For nearly 9 long years, secluded and in pain, and all my people know the charges were a frame. I see my accuser standing in the hall. He points his finger at us all. You now must pay the penalty for the crime of daring to be free. We are leaving Mother Russia. We have waited far too long. We are leaving Mother Russia. When they come for us, we'll be gone. Through all the centuries, we called this land our home. We love the Russian soil as much as anyone. In countless armies, our young boys have died for you. But never did you call them sons, you always called them Jew. We fell in battle for the Tsar. 100,000 died at Babi Yar. And yet no monument will mark the grave. Just on our passports the word Yevrei. We are leaving Mother Russia. We have waited far too long. We are leaving Mother Russia. When they come for us, we'll be gone. I send my song of hope to those I left behind. I pray that they may know the freedom that is mine. For through my darkest hours, alone inside my cell, I kept the vision of my home in Israel. My friends, we know what silence brings. Another Hitler waiting in the wings. So stand up now and shout it to the sky. They may bring us to our knees, but we'll never die. We are leaving Mother Russia. We have waited far too long. We are leaving Mother Russia. When they come for us, we'll be gone.
Thank you, Joseph. I asked them if they had heard the song, but of course this was an American song that we were singing for the people that we were protesting for. We didn't expect that this would go on after that. We wanted them to become Americans or Israelis or whatever they wanted to be. And so when Kathy came up with this idea, I got very excited. And I'm very, very proud to have the opportunity to present these wonderful people to you tonight. Members of our community, some of them members of our temple, but all of them with an association here. I'm just going to go in alphabetical order, even though they're not seated this way. Bronya Lerman. Bronya and her family were originally from Riga, Latvia. They came in March 27th, 1980, and ended their journey of emigration here in Detroit. Altogether, 7 members of the family came here. Bronya's parents, whom you knew, Sarah and Anton Oppenheim, our legendary building manager, their son Joseph, and of course Bronya, together with her husband Mark, and their very young children, then 4 and 3 years old, quite grown up now, Fina and Leah. Bronya pursued a career with Ford, and after 32 years with them, she retired in 2019 and today lives in West Bloomfield. Marina Fostavsky, who is a member, of course, of our congregation. At the time, she decided to immigrate. She lived in Moscow, where she had been born and raised. Together with her elderly parents and her son, she arrived here at the peak of Jewish immigration from the former Soviet Union, settling in Oak Park in 1996. After a career as research scientist at Henkel Corporation, she's now retired and living with her husband, Lev, of course, in West Bloomfield, and we're so happy that they're part of our community. Lev's story is like many we heard about in the movement for Soviet Jewry. A mechanical engineer by training in 1971, he began thinking about emigrating here from his home in what was then Leningrad, today St. Petersburg. This was at the time of so-called detention of Jews in USSR, and due to personal considerations and family circumstance, it took him nearly 20 years to make it happen. In December '89, he was ready to emigrate. He left in hopes that his 2 daughters would join him later, and they did. His journey took him through Vienna and Rome, where he sojourned for a time, and ultimately he arrived in Toledo, Ohio in 1990, and his daughters were able to join him shortly after. As for many others, Lev's emigration was not an easy experience, but as he put it, they survived, and he'll tell us more details in a moment. Once here, he found work as a mechanical engineer, and like many other former Soviet emigres, found other work during driving a taxi, working as a real estate agent. Today, he's retired, living with Marina, of course. Our friend Roman Kuchersky emigrated here as a youth from Moscow in 1976, during the very earliest period of emigration, together with his parents. Today, he lives in Bloomfield Township, managing the commercial building maintenance company that he owns and has built up for the last 30 years. His wife Lydia had her own path from the Soviet Union, emigrating in 1989 from Crimea, the disputed peninsula on the Black Sea that we hear so much about. They have 3 children, one of whom I had the privilege of presiding over his bar mitzvah, Andrian, and who celebrated his bar mitzvah right in this very room. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And finally, Alex Lumelski, way down the pike there. Alex was born in 1968 in Kharkov, Ukraine, then a republic of the USSR. He was the youngest of 3 children, his family of 5, parents Grigory and Svetlana and siblings Irene and Yasha, emigrated also early on in 1978, first settling in Oak Park and then in Southfield in 1982. As a young adult, Alex also lived in Hamtramck, and he now resides in Bloomfield Hills with his wife and his 2 children. He is an active member of our congregation, and how? He volunteers at Spinoza whenever he can to lead songs for us. He's a member of our board of trustees. He is the president, I guess, of Sky Creative, and the chief creative person there, a boutique graphic design. He did all the posters for Purim. He designs Humanistic Judaism magazine and has become, in many ways, the determiner and redesigned our logo, not this one, but the better one that we have now, and has become the design guru of our entire movement. So what I'd like to do is have each of you, and please use the microphone, you can pull it right to your mouths, each of you talk about your story. As you can see, we have a spread of ages and a spread of times in which people made their way to the United States. So we're just going to go, I think, in alphabetical order. We'll start with Roman. Okay. Just go ahead and grab that mic, and I'll stay over here, and then we'll have a few questions.
So thank you, Rabbi.
I might have to hold it a little closer, sorry.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, congregation, for inviting me here tonight. I have a little connection with this temple as well. My dad, Michael Kuchersky, when he owned the Fiddler restaurant, he was invited here to do some catering, and he also remodeled the kitchen back there, and I went here on a few higher holidays with him, and really got to like this place and what it stood for, and the services were adequate for us, nice and short, and my kids when they were young were able to sit through them and not complain too much.
How is he related to you, Robin?
Who? Is my dad.
Oh, okay.
So when Jeff called me and asked me if I wanted to participate in this informal discussion about emigrating from the USSR, I answered that I wouldn't have much to contribute since I was only 6 years old when we left. But he said, no problem, just talk about your experience and what you remember. And so that's where he convinced me, because I do remember a lot, But firsthand experience is not enough at that age. But as soon as I was old enough to understand, my parents and my grandparents would answer all my questions and fill in all the missing parts in my head. My grandfather, on my mom's side especially, he would always start from 1939 Poland, and that story would last a couple hours, and he would repeat it every few months until he was sure that I could retell it in my sleep. So tonight I'm not going to start from 1939, but I'll start from 1973, when America became the topic of conversation around our kitchen table. And we had a comfortable life, and it was, I believe, well above average Muscovite. My dad was assistant director of Cafe Lyra, is a popular spot in the center of the city. It was the place to be and be seen, visited frequently by government elites, famous musicians, Moscow ballet stars, and stars from the movie industry. At least that was what he told me. It was the same building that was turned into the first McDonald's in the 90s, with a line wrapped around it 3 times, until everybody in the city got a taste of the burger. My grandfather, the one from Poland, was the director of a lumber mill / furniture store on the outskirts of Moscow. And I'll tell you later how he made his money. We lived in a pretty spacious 2-bedroom apartment. I remember spending summers at our dacha, our summer house, with my grandparents while my parents were off vacationing in the mountains. They went to Poland. But yet, and I'm going to underline, my dad's dream was always to come to America, even though he was very comfortable where he was. His main reason, he wanted to create a better life for me, our family, not to be afraid and be proud of being Jewish. He knew that his life would be very different and turned upside down. He knew that he and Mom would have to work their tails off in order to succeed in this new country. But he had a vision, and he had the American dream. His nickname for a couple of years when we came here, and the rest of our families followed, was Moishe. His name was Michael, and Moishe, Moses, because he led everybody. We were about 90 of us when everybody came, and they called him Moses. Yeah. He led the way. He was I wouldn't say a gambler, but he was a big risk taker. And in February 1976, after 3 years of conversations, my dad finally convinced his parents that it was the right thing to do, even though life was good, treating everybody well. We finally said our goodbyes, me, Dad, and Mom. And me and my parents were the first to leave out of a pretty big family. We parted ways at the airport with a silver dollar sewn into my jacket, bunch of jewelry hidden away somewhere else, 25 pieces of luggage. We sent our entire apartment in a big container on a ship. I knew from my grandfather telling me that it was an organization called HIAS, acronym HIAS, that basically bought our tickets and made our way a lot easier. It was around $5,000 for the entire family that my dad would have to repay within 5 years after landing in the States. And then And then the Federation took over once we landed and made our life very comfortable. Thank you to the Federation. For the first 3 months, they set us up an apartment in Berkeley, furniture, even pillows and dining table. Our fridge was full of food, and they just made it really nice. Again, I'd like to remember that my dad had this vision, and he held it pretty tight. And he realized the American dream, as much time he had on this earth. At one time, he had about 5 restaurants, and he gave that vision to me. And thank you again to my parents for moving here and being able to raise my family, sending my boys to college, and now they're going to realize the dream. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bronya Lerman. I have a very dear connection to this place. It became our family towards the end of 1980, when Rabbi Wein, upon insisting from Claudia Salovich, now Hirschman, who worked at the Jewish Vocational Service, convinced Rabbi Wein to hire my dad to be the custodian. Rabbi Wein said, well, he doesn't speak any English. His assistant at the time, unfortunately, I don't remember her last name. Was it Helen? Was it Sonia? She knew Yiddish. Dad spoke fluent Yiddish, and she volunteered to be the interpreter between Sherwin and my dad. And the rest is history. Dad lasted here for 25 years, and but the whole congregation with Sherwin Wein welcomed our family, celebrated all the highlights in our family. When we became citizens, they lined us up along the wall, and there was a parade of well-wishers and wonderful, wonderful congratulations. When my dad's mom, at the ripe age of 102, with his younger brother and family, landed here in 91. Again, there was a big celebration here, and there was a special service where my grandma got to lit the one of the Hanukkah candles. It was in the Jewish news. I have the page somewhere. I tried to find it, but I have the picture on my phone. We landed here on March 27th, 1980. It was Erev Pesach. This was my first time on a flight from New York to Detroit when I saw Orthodox Jews. I've never seen them besides pictures. Everybody was flying home for Pesach. And from that day on, when we landed at 1 o'clock here, it was a hard but a very blessed journey. We left behind not a lot of family. Dad came from a very historic Latvian Jews family. There were 7 generations of his family, of the German Jews that settled in Riga. They were very prosperous. In 1940, the Soviet Union took over Latvia, deprived everybody of their private possessions, their businesses, so on and so forth. In 1941, Hitler took over. And the native Latvians were thinking that Hitler will liberate them from the Soviets, and also they became collaborators. When the Nazis were telling them, shoot the Jews, they were the first ones to shoot the Jews. Not everybody, a lot of native Latvians were saving, hiding. Jews through the whole 4 years when Latvia was invaded. Again, I will repeat Roma's sentiments, the gratitude to the Jewish international organizations, to the history that Jeffrey told us, with the movement to let my people go. That song actually was very popular with Paul Robeson. We would listen it on BBC late at night and Voice of America. Our journey was very similar to millions of the Jews looking for better life. In Latvia, being Jewish among a very Nordic Slavic culture, yeah, you would hear some derogative words when you're on public transportation. I kind of felt it on my skin when I went back for the first time in 1991. And I was riding with my friends in a trolley, and you could feel those looks and those feelings, of a bit of anxiety in the crowd kind of came back to me. Again, it's maybe my personal reflection, but it was our life. Yes, there were obstacles, and I bet the panel will agree with me, being Jewish in the Soviet Union, and even going back to old Russia. The grandma whom I mentioned was telling me a story which I cannot forget. She was 20 years old. She had her first baby. I do not know, maybe with my grandpa's traveling, they wound up in a border town outside Latvia in small Russian settlement where they were called Black Cossacks, on horses, were burning the village, burning that little shtetl, and killing and looking for Jews. Grandma was blonde, blue-eyed, and she was standing in the doorway. She did not speak a word of Russian. She was standing in the doorway with her little baby, and the Cossack flew up to her and goes, "Sister, have you seen any Jews here?" And she just, because she could not talk, and if she would be, discovered. So she just, nodded negatively, and the Cossack went away. So these were one of the very few stories that I remember from Grandma. And I'll just finish with, again, with my gratitude. Everybody in my family settled here and lives the American dream. Yes, we work hard. But the first steps here in this country, in Detroit, we were chaperoned. We felt like we were held by our hand. The first at least 3 months, help with the apartment payments. Again, as Roma said, full refrigerator. Help with getting a job. That's how my dad wound up here. Actually, even Claudia helped me I was bent on getting my teacher's certificate from Wayne State and then teach English with my Russian accent to high school kids. I didn't have the guts, plus the economy in 1980 was terrible here. Schools were boarded up and people were leaving for Texas. And it was amazing to us, and we're forever grateful, the help and the support that we got here. Thank you so much.
We'll just go right down the panel. So
Okay.
I'll do it like this. Can you hear me okay? I hope it works. It does? Okay. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I believe you know me. I'm a temple member.
I almost know all of you and love you. So I would like to tell you my story that begins here in 1996.
You have to get really close.
Okay.
Really close.
I don't think it works.
It's on, it's just very soft. Tap into it. Tap into it.
I can take this one.
Yeah, it's on, but it's just very soft.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, so I immigrated from Soviet Union in 1996, and as Rabbi said, with two. Okay, with both of my parents. They were 80, in their 80s at that time, and my son, who was 23 at that time. So probably the main question is, why did we do it? Why did we immigrate? So I was born and raised in Moscow, and it was a typical Moscow Jewish family. My mom was a housewife. My mom, unfortunately, wasn't able to get any formal education because she came from bourgeois family, and after October Revolution, the family was actually forced out of their place. They were stripped of all their possessions and property, and actually stripped of all of their rights. So the question to go to university or college, the question for her was not. It was not possible. On the other hand, my dad came from poor intelligentsia family. His mom was a physician assistant and midwife, and his dad was a journalist. And they actually came from the small town near Kiev called Pereyaslavl, that a place where Shalom Aleichem, if you know, was born. And actually my grandfather was acquainted with him and was his friend. So it was the place that was called then in the Shalom Aleichem's stories, Asrilovka, if you know. So it was my dad's family was a respectful family, but they didn't have any property. So, okay. This gave him a possibility to get education. So as many young Jewish men at that time, he left Pale of Settlement and went to Moscow, got into university, got his degree, started family, but in 1939 he was drafted to an army, to a Red Army at that time, and he actually fought World War II and served in the army for more than 25 years. Yep. He retired as a lieutenant colonel and colonel, you see? Yes, and after this he was a managing director of the big hospital in Moscow. So the life for my parents seems to get kind of normal after all the tragedies they have. Comfortable, but my dad was actually the first one in the family who told us we have to leave when the time came. All of us, like being Soviet Jews, experienced anti-Semitism. But, you know, we learned somehow to live with it, to work our way around it, or in spite of it. And we were trying to make our lives there. The thing is that we don't only have this people's anti-Semitism that Brony was talking about, when you in the bus or train, you feel it on your skin. You feel it on your skin. We also had state anti-Semitism. when, as Rabbi said, you know, being Jewish in Russia wasn't your religious association. It was your nationality. So growing like when you're a kid in kindergarten or school, you will understand right away that you're different from your classmates. Even in the teacher's list, just across your name, there will be your nationality, Jewish. Nationality in your passport was also Jewish. So living like from the early age, you understand that to get, to achieve something good in your life, to get to university, to get a good job, actually to get the things that your Russian friends are getting, you have to be better, you have to work harder. And I believe that was probably one of the reasons that Soviet Jews succeed here, because we had this, you know, during our lives. So when, with all this anti-Semitism going around and all the economic stuff, when the gates of immigration opened, a lot of Soviet Jews started to flee. In 90s, actually the situation in Russia was very difficult and tragic. Just to name, we had 1991 coup, and then collapse of the Soviet Union, and then it was Black October, constitutional crisis in 1993. So it was this, the country was in turmoil, and there were tanks and blood on the streets. It was frightening. So in 1994, we applied for our visas to United States, and it took us like 2 years to receive them. The reasons for our immigration were not only because of the anti-Semitism or because of economical difficulties. The reason was political too, and maybe most of all it was political, because at that time, even, you know, after all these military attempts on emerging Russian democracy failed, the country was in a terrible condition. There were, because the reforms were very hard on simple folk, anti-Semitism grew as usual, and you can see brown shirts on the streets and actually opened anti-Semitic meetings. And this was very frightening to everybody. So in 1996, we got our visas, and leaving everything behind, all that we had, we got 2 suitcases for each of us, and we flew to Detroit. So my first striking impressions when I was looking through the car window was I saw a building with the big letters, it was written, Jewish Family Service. And it blew my head. You will never see this in Russia. So when we arrived here, we had help from Jewish Family Service, from Jewish Vocational Service, and it was very needed and important for my parents especially. You know, it was, as you said, it was a peak of immigration at that time. And the exodus was in the air in the Soviet Union. And I remember a joke when it was, they say, a Jew goes along the street and he sees a group of Jews talking. And he is saying, I don't know what you're talking about, but we have to leave. So here we were in Detroit, starting our new life. And it was not easy for me to start the life at 46, but we struggled. And as they say, the bread of immigration is bitter. So we really realized it. But due to my good education and experience and PhD that I got in Russia, I got my first professional offer, I would say, really fast. And the thing is that the company was located in Port Huron. So, but I happily accepted the offer. But the thing was that I just, in the fall of 1996, I got my driver's license. I didn't drive the car in Russia. And by the time that I had to drive to Port Huron, I was immature driver. And it was winter, it was December. So I have many funny and scary stories to tell you about my driving. But at the end of the day, I did it. And I was working for the same company for more than 25 years. Of course, only 10 years I was driving to Port Huron. And then the company was relocated, and it relocated to Madison Heights, and my drive became shorter. So during these years, I was lucky to meet a lot of wonderful and kind people. A lot of them are here, temple members. We became friends, and it was really wonderful. And what I want to say that almost looking back at what we have in Russia now, we realize that we made the right decision. Yeah. And that's why always, every year, we celebrate our anniversary as a day of our freedom. And we sincerely appreciate that you were the part of the movement that helped us to get this freedom. So thank you.
Yeah, it seems to me that almost everything was said already by Rabbi and everybody else, you know. But I want to give you like probably big but sketchy pictures, how I saw it. Like studying, I grew up in Soviet Union, of course, after the Second World War, and with my parents was engineers and managers in aerospace industry. At that time, in my opinion, it's like I saw it, Jews of Soviet Union were pretty much loyal to regime. Many, like my parents and their friends, believed in socialism because after October Revolution, 1917, Pale of Settlement was abolished, and Jews greatly benefited from it. Indeed, many Jews pretty much succeeded. They became engineers, writers, scientists, musicians, and so on. For example, all my relatives, like my uncles, was very top managers. And one of my uncles was almost minister on foreign trade, for example. Was like deputy minister. And at that time, seemed that anti-Semitism was over. Most Jews who survived revolution and persecution of 1933 and 1939 was pretty much okay. At least people I knew and my friends of my parents was pretty much well done people. So they was top engineers in aerospace industry, building new aircraft and first Sputniks. And I knew many of them. Then, in 1941, 1945, Second World War started, and we know what happened to Jews in Europe. But when the war was over, anti-Semitism raised its head again. Like doctor's trial, I don't know, everybody knows about it probably. Cosmopolites, it's how Jews was called, and so on. And I was like 5 years old, but I remember all this stuff because so many Jews lived in our apartments and they became persecuted by no reason. And so every Jew felt threatened. I was a kid, I remember it very much. It looked like government turned against them. At that time, you remember Cold War, after the famous speech of Churchill, Cold War started. Now, as I see it now, in perspective, the mood basically started changing in 1967, after 6 days war, when something really big happened. Israel won, and we found out that we are not weak anymore, as everybody thought about us at that time. And we can fight. Even my Russian friends were proud of us. It's kind of a joke, but my friends told me, oh, you're very good, you can fight on the street. And so we are very proud of it. And Jews, it looks like the Russian Jews raised their heads. This was a real starting point. Nobody told about it, but I remember it really vividly. In 1970s, I have heard the first time about the groups of Jews who wanted to expatriate to Israel. Authorities called them Zionists. They organized demonstration in Moscow. This movement was growing with support of around the globe. Jewish organization and United States Congress also we learned about it from Voice of America and other shortwave radios. It was underground, it was prohibited, but we did it. So we learned about, of course we learned this what about Rabbi told us about Jackson-Vanik amendment. So we knew about it, but not from Russians radio, but from underground, foreign, from West America mostly. In mid-70s, only mid-70s, many of my friends became leaders in the immigration movement. So it probably was my generation. We became like 20-something, 30s, so we already was grown up in 30s. And there was growing belief that Israel is the only country for Jews to escape anti-Semitism, and we should fight for immigration. Also, it was against Marxism-Leninism dogma. It was was not ethical to think about it. The slogan was, at that time, of course, between Jews, it was we talk in our kitchens. If Russians don't like us, let us go. There were there were other people who were looking for political freedom and better life, and they wanted to go to the United States. During those years of struggle for immigration, some of activists of the movement were fired from work and even jailed. I myself was interrogated by KGB, which was looking for my Zionist connections. Finally, in the late 70s, because of the Soviet government's hope to achieve economic benefits, first of all, because of this reason, activity of Jews inside the Soviet Union and very powerful support from the West, from the United States, Israel, and we felt it pretty much. So we knew, so we are supported very much. Soviet government opened its immigration gate, and first large group of Soviet Jews was able to immigrate. Due to family circumstances, I personally could not do it because of my parents. They used for aerospace, they were not allowed to go. It was very strange, but in KGB office, they suggested me to go. They're trying to relieve themselves from the Jews, from political like Jews. Okay. Unfortunately, in few years, because of huge number of people, Jews willing to immigrate, Russian authority closed the door again. The gate was closed. But once again, like always in Jewish history, miracle happened. And the whole political situation in late 80s changed when Mikhail Gorbachev came to power. He started perestroika. Everybody knows what means perestroika. Yes? Okay. People know. Kind of changing, big change. Okay, political change. And again, Jews were allowed to go. But, sad thing happened. With liberalization of the country, conspiratorial anti-Semitism popped up. Jews once again were blamed, Jews once again were scapegoated. But this time, because they were blamed for the Russian Revolution and killing the Tsar. So, in my childhood in school, everybody thinks that Jews was leaders of revolution. Jews actually was make this revolution happen. But not, like Trotsky and other big names in the Russian Revolution. Trotsky, the first Russian government was mostly Jewish, and now it was really bad things. What happened to the Russian? But fair to say, it was not the government policy. It was government. It was coming not from government, like we used to. Before this, before we knew everything was against Jews, was coming from the government. But now it was coming from some dark sources and street talks. People openly talking about, for example, the kids would not go to the musical schools because Jews was everywhere. It was, it's some very, very stupid talk, but it was very widespread. Time was scary again, very scary again. At that time, I was 45 years old with family. Knew a little bit English. It decided to go to America. How we did it? Soviet authorities did everything in their power to prevent Jews from leaving the country with an increasingly bureaucratic visa application process. Technically, you needed Israeli visa, which you can get from Israeli relatives. If you do not have relatives, just go ahead and invent them. So everybody knew it. They knew that we invented the relatives. We would ask, next step, you needed exit visa. And you have to pay 60 rubles to give up your citizenship. Exchange to $90 for 130 rubles. It was, and what we have. So, I was not able to. So I left very. It's hard to say it, like good library, which costs a lot of money. So all the books, so I could not. Some small things I could not take it with me. So initially, Vienna was first stop for all Jews exiting USSR. And this route came to be known as Vienna-Rome pipeline. That's how it was called. And in this case scenario, you go to Vienna and Rome and wait for United States visa in Rome. In Vienna, I was waiting. I was getting to Rome, but as the number of immigrants swelled in Rome, by the summer of 1989, processing time took 70-80 days. In my case, it took 4 months to get American visa, staying in Rome. But it was not bad time, actually. Since it was our first travel abroad, so we never was allowed to go abroad. And so many people trying to see Italy. We're trying to save every penny to get bus and go look at cities. And we call it humorously Rome vacation, like the movie. Rome vacation. How called?
Roman holiday.
Oh, Roman holiday. I'm sorry, I forgot. It was really a Roman holiday because you can go to Italy, you will see Russian Jews everywhere. Everybody traveled. It was so exciting because we never traveled, so even Bulgaria was not available for us. Nowadays, we remember those days with humor, but believe me, it was scary times. Mostly because it was very uncertain. We have no idea what's ahead of us or what we're going to do. Many people like my friends was really with kids, like 3-5 kids, no money. They have no idea how they will survive in the United States. We knew it's a very competitive society. You have to find jobs. So. Okay, and I'm just finishing. All this adventure was not possible without support of HIAS, Joint, and other Jewish organizations. What Rabbi mentioned, it's much more that I knew about it, around the globe, and we appreciate it very much. What happened later, and after I reached the destination, it's another story. I have to write a book about it. Thank you very much.
Let's see if this one works.
It does?
Let's see. Hello.
Here it does.
Now, here, use this one. So this will be the only one that's working.
Maybe this one.
Thanks.
Hello? Is everybody in? Hi, Miriam. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Alex Lamelsky, and I want to thank Jeff for inviting me to participate in this panel. I want to thank you all for being here. And I also want to share that when my son found out that I was participating in this panel, he asked, they're going to give you a microphone? And they're going to let you talk into it in front of people? And he was going to call you and have a word. So I'll try to be good, you know. I'll try to say exactly what you want to hear. Okay? No. Anyway, I also want to thank you guys because listening to this panel, a lot of things you have said rang some bells for me because although I was very young, like Roman when he came over here, I was just a kid. And I didn't personally experience these things. I didn't have to go to the offices and file the paperwork, but I remember hearing about it. And I remember that time and, you know, the stress that's involved with that kind of an undertaking. And some of the things you guys said, especially what you were just talking about, really brought back some old memories for me. I also want to say before I launch into my story, if anybody wants to take a bathroom break before I start on that. But I want to say, Roman, I knew your dad a little bit, and I had a lot of respect for him when he ran the Fiddler. And I remember having some nice conversations with him. That was the best restaurant in Detroit as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, so back to, everybody's back? Okay. I was born in 1968. We lived in the Soviet Union in Kharkov, and I knew that I lived in Ukraine because I knew that there was a great Ukrainian poet named Shevchenko, and we lived around the corner from Park Shevchenko. But other than that, I never spoke a word of Ukrainian. I never knew anyone who spoke in Ukrainian. And in light of the news of the past year, I just find it interesting how different things were then, you know. But that's another story. My family was not political. Both my mother and father were engineers. My mother was trained as an electrical engineer and also as a mechanical engineer. And my dad was, I think, a mechanical engineer, but he was a designer as well. Much more technical than what I do. My dad's brother, my uncle, he lived in Moscow and he was political. He was involved in what they called the dissident movement. And when he's a physicist. And when he was married in 1973, some of the things I'm going to say are things that I've learned from them, so I don't have direct experience. But when he was married in 1973, I remember him saying that he and his wife, Nadia, took a look around and said, you know, I don't think this is going to work out for us here. We're going to have to do something about this, and we're going to have to leave. And I remember hearing that my dad, who was his older brother, thought they were absolutely nuts. You're going to go where? And you're going to do what? You know, my dad was sort of, because they lived in Moscow, and I think they were more connected with sort of how things were running. And my dad was basically busy going to work every day and was not involved in world politics or anything like that. So the main reason I think my uncle decided to leave the Soviet Union was because of his background, him being Jewish. His professional life was going to be limited, these opportunities. So that's, I think, why they decided to leave. And they moved to the States in 1975. They had to pull some strings. We didn't, at the time, have family abroad, so they were the first. And he had some connections, and somehow he was able to finagle his way out of the country. And I remember that my parents used to receive letters from him, and the letters were fairly realistic. They were not of the sort of like, check out this long car. Remember the cars of the 70s? Like, you know, it wasn't like, check out all the stuff that we have. It was more like, you know, we're learning about this thing called car insurance. And it turns out it's really complicated, you know. So his letters were fairly brutal and realistic. And he did not paint a rosy picture. But on the other hand, you know, he was striving and he was doing well. You know, he had a good job. First they were on the East Coast, and then he ended up in Ann Arbor working for Ford. While we were receiving these letters, I think my parents were, for the most part, just kind of bemused, but not thinking of it as something that they might do. And what changed was that Jeff mentioned I'm the youngest of three kids. My brother's 8 years older than I am, and my sister's 10 years older. So I'm guessing I might have been an accident. But anywho, my brother had a very good friend who, by the way, was not Jewish. Was straight up one of those Russian guys, like who, you know, probably a Putin supporter now, like close shaved hair, like black leather jacket, you know, one of those guys. But anyway, by the way, in the Soviet Union, as I remember it, there were two kinds of people. There were the Russian people who had their hair shaved really close and tended to wear like black leather jackets, and there were the Jewish guys who wore sweaters. That's how I remember it, you know. And the Jewish guys who wore sweaters tended to be, I remember, like very intellectual, yeah. So, and but back to my brother's story. His best friend, whose name was Henry, had an older brother, and so his older brother turned 18, was drafted into the Soviet Army. And at this time, I was 8, and my brother was 16. And something happened during basic training that I don't know what the specifics were, but he came back dead 2 weeks later. Okay, I don't think it was hazing, I don't think it was deliberate, but something happened to him, and my mom freaked out. My mom freaked out because my brother was not exactly what you would call college material. My sister was, but he was more of like a, you know, free thinker, and kind of ran a side hustle of selling illicit Western goods such as Pink Floyd albums and blue jeans. And, you know, he was on his way to like some sort of a underground business plan, you know. And most likely was about to be drafted into the Army. And so when this happened with our good family friends, my mom, as I heard it, told my father, we're moving to the States. And she didn't ask. And when he said, huh, what? She said, I'm moving to the States, I'm taking the kids, and you can come if you like. Okay. So my dad, knowing what's good for him, packed up, and then at this point in the story, enter a relative who lived in Israel. This was a real relative, okay? She was a woman. I don't remember her name, but I do know that she existed. And they began to write letters to one another. And the interesting thing about this part is that my parents sat there and composed these letters and had to write in code the fact that they wanted to receive an invitation from Israel to be hosted or sponsored. And the way that they coded this was they managed to work everyone's birthdays into this letter. You know, but they didn't say, you know, please send us an invitation, here's everyone's birthdays, because you'll need to know. It was just a long letter that had a probably a wild plot, and for some reason, every kid's birthday was mentioned. This is what my mom told me. And the aunt, whatever her name was, I don't know her name, I'm sorry, I was very young, picked up on what they were putting down, and lo and behold, the letter arrived, which I believe they had to take to an office called Avir. Is that right? Does that sound right? Avir. Yeah. This was a bureaucratic office with the government, municipal government, that would process your requests. And as soon as they moved forward with this, as soon as this was made official, they knew that they would be released from their employment. So, and the tricky part was that they didn't know how long it would take to receive a reply. So you had to kind of take a little bit of a risk, and you had to be clever about your planning, make sure you stocked up on supplies, because you might be there a while. I think it because I was told, but it's my understanding that it didn't take that long for them to get a response, because apparently we had an apartment in the center of town which was very much desired. And there was someone at this office who potentially had the opportunity to move into it. Now, I don't know if that's true, but you know, I never let facts get in the way of a good story, so I'm going with it. This is what I've heard.
It is true and very common.
Yeah. So we were able, I think, to get a response within about a couple months, maybe a month or two. I'll mention a few other little anecdotes from that time. My sister, who, as I said, was 10 years older than me, she was about 18 at the time, and she was going to school, but she was also working. She had a part-time job. And what I recall was that she came home very upset one day because they had had a meeting, one of these like young communist kind of meetings, where it was announced that she was a traitor to the country and that she would be leaving. And everyone in the meeting was encouraged to say a few words to share their thoughts about this horrendous act. And they went around the room and they each took a turn essentially stoning her verbally, saying, you know, what a you know, disgrace you are to the nation, to leave the country and so forth. And I think there were people there who were older than 18. It wasn't just kids, it was adults as well. So she had to endure this meeting where she was just absolutely disgraced. And then after the meeting in the hallway, every one of those people walked up to her and said, "We are so happy for you. We wish you well. You know, we will miss you. We love you, you know." Okay. So I think the point of that story is that there was this culture, as I understand it, of knowing what is expected of you to say and how you should act. And then there was a subculture underneath that that was more intimate and private and more real, you know. But this confused my sister very much because she really was upset. She was upset even after they gave her their well wishes. I think she was just confused about why would you say, you know, this, but then act like that. So that was, I think, interesting. Personally, I've never experienced anti-Semitism that I know of. I think my brother did. He was older, so he was of an age where, you know, like when you're a teenager, as I mentioned, he ran with a rough crowd. If you could picture Grease, he would have been, you know, like one of the greaser guys. And my sister was more of the Sandy variety. Okay. So he ran with a rougher crowd, and I think he ran with people, frankly, who were less educated and thus more likely to be anti-Semitic, I think. My sister experienced it as I just described, but I personally never really felt that. I also think that part of it is my personality, which is I'm kind of aloof to it, you know. Or perhaps I've been lucky. I don't know. Anyway, when we left the Soviet Union, I remember people sewing valuables into their coats. So that rang a bell when you said that. As far as I know, we didn't sew anything into our coats, but maybe they didn't trust me to share that with me. But we took a train to a city called Brest, B-R-E-S-T, which was on the Polish border, on the Soviet side of the Polish border. And there we had to say goodbye to my grandmothers. And we got on a train, and I remember being very excited that I was seeing Poland. You know, and I thought, wow, we're not overseas, but, you know, we're in another country. And I remember thinking that Poland wasn't very impressive because it's mostly just farms, you know. Then we got to Vienna, and Vienna was incredible, as some of you may know. It was beautiful. You know, we were only there for a couple of weeks. And then we spent a really fun summer in Rome, and it really was a Roman holiday. We lived in a little town called Ostia by the sea. Ostia, okay. And it was the first time I saw heroin needles on the beach. You know, am I done? Okay. Well, no, the rabbi says, you know. But I'll fast forward.
What did you see on the beach?
Heroin needles. It was the wild west, as they rightly warned us in the Soviet Union. I'll fast forward, but let me just say this: the Soviet Union was a complicated society, and it was not all bad. I think all the things that you hear about it that are negative are true, but there are other things that I think about it that you maybe hear less about. For instance, kids could sign up for all kinds of clubs and athletics and arts lessons, and this was provided pretty much free to anyone who signed up. You couldn't travel, obviously, out of the country, but I don't remember it being as all evil, you know. I think that you can find examples of both, you know. But just want to say that, and then I'm going to fast forward to when we arrived in Detroit. The first memory I have was going to Farmer Jack and going grocery shopping. And I think everybody was pretty much overwhelmed by all the choices. That was a big thing. Like the other panelists, we received support from HIAS, and we were placed into an apartment in Oak Park, where we lived for about 2 years. And then eventually my parents got jobs and learned some English, and they bought a house in Southfield, where I grew up. I would say that during my early years in the States and my teenage years, I was pretty clueless about my background, my history. I think I blocked a lot of it out, you know. My dad died of cancer when I was 17, so I blocked that out, I think. I think I found solace in music. In particular, I was influenced by my brother's interest in hard rock music and my sister's interest in more sort of folky music, so I had a blend of influence. And I kind of lost myself in that, and I did okay in schools, but I think my real education actually came from the rock and roll music I was listening to. Because if you look for it, you can find a lot of wisdom in a lot of these songs. And in particular, it's this music that I think led me to ask questions, you know, and to see through what was being presented to me. And I think that because we have this background of having come from the Soviet Union, where you had to live this kind of a double life, this Orwellian kind of, you know, you say this, but privately you mean that. I think maybe I developed a little bit of an antenna for it as I was listening to, you know, Roger Waters and Dylan and all that. And that antenna eventually opened my eyes to some of the hypocrisies that exist in our society here. And I know everyone has talked about the American dream, and I can't deny that, you know, it's nice not to be persecuted, and that it's nice, you know, to be able to make a living and, you know, make your own choices. But it's not all rosy here either, and I think there's a lot of parallels between, you know, what we experienced as Jews in the Soviet Union and what, you know, African Americans experience here, you know, and I think the American dream exists for people who, you know, want to look for it, but there's the other side too that I think we need to always keep in mind, you know, and that's just been my eye-opening experience, you know, so, yeah.
Well, because of the lateness of the hour, we won't have questions right now, but you guys can talk a little bit more at the O&A. Thank you so much for your time, your stories, your insights. You reminded me of a lot of things I remember learning about back then that I'd forgotten. If you don't mind, Melanie, put up the lyrics for our closing song. You guys can return to your seats while we're singing, or just go stretch your legs. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
הנה מה טוב ומנעים שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שבת אחים גם יחד. Behold how good it is when people dwell together, living as one people, hand in hand. What keeps us safe and strong is that we have each other, one human family across the land. Hine ma tov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad.
Thank you to Joseph, to Melanie for the slides, to David for the streaming, to our guests. Thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.